The scorned engineer Marcus wiped the grease from his calloused hands as he watched the pristine shuttles land on the crystalline platform of Nexus Prime. The Zilithian Empire's capital world never failed to remind him of his place in the cosmic hierarchy. Towering spires of polished metal and living crystal stretched toward the violet sky, each one a testament to millennia of alien superiority. The diplomatic quarter buzzed with activity as representatives from across the galaxy gathered for the annual Concord. Marcus adjusted his simple Earth Federation uniform, feeling painfully underdressed among the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor of the other species. His assignment was routine maintenance on the human embassy's systems, nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. Careful with that equipment, human, sneered a tall Zilithian noble, his silver skin gleaming in the artificial light. We wouldn't want your primitive hands to break something important. Marcus bit back his response, focusing on the diagnostic panel before him. He'd heard worse. Much worse. The Zilithians had ruled this sector for over 10,000 years. There. Noble houses tracing bloodlines back to the first star conquests. To them, humanity was a cosmic accident, a species that had stumbled into faster-than-light travel through dumb luck rather than evolutionary superiority. From across the grand atrium, Princess Xandria Valtheron observed the exchange with growing distaste. Her violet eyes, marking her as third-generation nobility, tracked the human's methodical work. There was something about his composure that intrigued her. Lesser species usually cowered when faced with Zilithian disdain. Yet this Marcus Chen showed remarkable restraint. Your Highness, whispered her aide. The human delegation has arrived for the technology assessment. Xandria nodded absently, still watching Marcus. The assessment was a formality, really. Humanity's contributions to galactic civilization were minimal compared to the great houses. Their ships were crude, their weapons inefficient, their lifespan laughably short, yet something nagged at her about dismissing them so icily. The formal ceremony began with the traditional reading of bloodlines. Each delegation presented their ancestral credentials, genetic purity certificates stretching back countless generations. The Catherian Empire boasted 40,000 years of unbroken rule. The crystal minds of Zerion traced their consciousness to the birth of the galaxy itself. When humanity's turn came, Ambassador Wright stood with quiet dignity. We present the children of Earth, he announced simply. Our bloodline spans 200,000 years of evolution, adaptation, and survival. The assembled nobles erupted in barely contained laughter. 200,000 years was nothing, a blink of an eye in galactic terms. Worse still, human genetic records were chaotic. Mixed, impure by noble standards. They had no great houses, no selective breeding programs, no careful cultivation of superior traits. Marcus felt his jaw clench as the laughter echoed through the chamber. He'd grown up hearing stories of human ingenuity, of his ancestors who had pulled themselves from primitive caves to touch the stars in mere millennia. It meant nothing to these ancient bloodlines. Then something extraordinary happened. The central display, showcasing artifacts from various civilizations, began to malfunction. Sparks flew from the control systems as the ancient devices spun wildly. Out of control, security forces moved to contain the situation, but nothing they tried worked. The resonance cascade is destabilizing, announced a technician frantically. If we can't shut it down, the entire chamber could collapse. Alien experts rushed forward, their advanced tools proving useless against the chaotic energy patterns. Minutes passed in growing panic as the situation worsened. The assembled dignitaries began evacuating. Noble bloodlines or not, they weren't. Immune to falling debris, Marcus watched the chaos with growing understanding. He'd seen similar patterns before in ancient Earth ruins that predated recorded history. Without thinking, he pushed past the barriers and approached the wildly spinning artifacts. "Get back, human," shouted a Zilithian guard. "This requires true expertise." But Marcus was already at the control interface, his hands moving with practiced precision. The moment his fingers touched the ancient controls, something remarkable happened. The chaotic energy patterns suddenly synchronized, responding to his touch like a familiar friend. The spinning artifacts slowed, then stopped. Settling into perfect harmony, silence filled the great chamber as every eye turned to the simple human engineer. who had accomplished what their greatest minds could not. Princess Xandria felt something shift inside her chest, crack in the certainty she'd always known. Marcus stepped back from the controls, his heart pounding. He had no idea how he'd known what to do, only that the ancient interface had felt somehow familiar, like coming home after a long journey. The implications terrified him, but they also filled him with something he'd never felt before in Zilithian space: hope. Unlikely Alenzeth Emergency Council convened within hours of the artifact incident. Princess Xandria found herself appointed to lead the investigation, much to her father's displeasure. Emperor Valtherin preferred his daughter focus on more suitable pursuits like selecting an appropriate mate from the noble houses rather than concerning herself with human anomalies. "This is beneath your station," he stated coldly during their private audience. "Let the science cast handle this curiosity." But Xandria had seen something in that chamber that she couldn't forget. The way the ancient technology had responded to Marcus's touch wasn't random chance. There was a connection there, something that challenged everything they believed about bloodline supremacy. "Father, what if we've been wrong?" she asked quietly. "What if humanity's true heritage is hidden from us?" The Emperor's silver skin darkened with displeasure. "Careful, daughter. Such questions border on heresy. Our bloodlines have ruled for good reason. Do not let one human's lucky guess cloud your judgment." Despite his warnings, Xandria found herself standing outside the human embassy's maintenance bay the next morning. Marcus looked surprised to see her, quickly setting down his tools and offering a respectful bow that she waved away. "I need you to come with me," she said without preamble. "There are other artifacts, older ones, in the Imperial archives. I want to see if they respond to you the same way." Marcus studied her carefully. Royal attention was rarely good news for his kind. "With respect, Your Highness, I'm just a mechanic. What happened yesterday was probably a fluke." "Probably," she agreed. "But we're going to find out for certain." The Imperial archives stretched deep beneath Nexus Prime's surface, vast halls, filled with relics from 1,000 conquered worlds. Xandria led Marcus through security checkpoints that would normally be impossible for a human to pass, her royal authority opening doors that had remained sealed for centuries. "These are from the Outer Rim excavations," she explained, gesturing to a collection of crystalline devices. "Pre-dynastic period, before even the oldest noble houses rose to power." Marcus approached the display case hesitantly. The artifacts were beautiful, their surfaces covered in flowing script that seemed to shift and change as he watched. When Xandria opened the protective barrier, he felt the same strange familiarity he'd experienced the day before. His hands trembled slightly. As he reached for the nearest crystal, the moment his skin made contact, the entire chamber erupted in soft, harmonious light. The artifacts began to sing, their crystalline structures resonating with musical tones that seemed to touch something deep in his soul. Xandria gasped as the ancient script became readable, translating itself into both human and Zilithian languages. The text spoke of the Primarch civilization, first to achieve faster-than-light travel. The teachers who had seeded knowledge across the galaxy before, mysteriously vanishing eons ago. "This is impossible," she whispered, watching more artifacts respond to Marcus's presence. The Primarchs were legendary, mythical beings of pure energy and wisdom. Marcus felt something stirring in his memory, fragments of dreams he'd been having since childhood. Visions of vast ships sailing between stars, of beings that looked remarkably human standing before councils of young species, sharing knowledge and guidance before fading into history. "Maybe they weren't mythical," he said softly, his hand still, pressed against the singing crystal. "Maybe they were just forgotten." As the hours passed, they worked together to decode the ancient messages. Xandria found herself drawn to Marcus's quiet intelligence, the way he approached each puzzle with methodical patience rather than noble arrogance. He, in turn, was surprised by her genuine curiosity and willingness to question everything she'd been taught. "You're not what I expected," she admitted, as they took a break from their research. They sat in a small alcove, sharing simple rations that Marcus had brought from the embassy. "What did you expect?" he asked, offering her half of his protein bar. "Someone crude, uneducated, desperate to prove himself worthy of our attention." She paused, studying his face in the soft light of the ancient crystals. "Instead, you're probably the most genuinely intelligent person I've spoken with in years." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. Most Silithians wouldn't agree with that assessment. "Most Silithians are fools," she said with surprising vehemence. "We've become so obsessed with bloodline purity that we've forgotten what real strength looks like." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and Marcus felt something shift in the air. This wasn't just about ancient artifacts anymore. Something was growing between them, something that defied every social barrier their respective cultures had constructed. When Xandria reached out to touch his hand, her cool silver skin against his warm human flesh, neither of them pulled away. The ancient crystals around them pulsed gently, as if approving of this moment of connection across species lines. "This is dangerous," Marcus whispered, though he didn't move his hand away from hers. "Yes," Xandria agreed, her violet eyes intense in the crystal light. "It is." But neither of them cared about danger anymore. They had found something worth risking everything for, even if they were only beginning to understand what that might be. The ancient truth coordinates hidden in the Primarch crystals led them to a dead system on the galaxy's edge, where 3 burned-out stars cast no light on the ancient world that orbited between them. Xandria had convinced the Imperial Science Division to fund an expedition, claiming it was a routine archaeological survey. She hadn't mentioned Marcus's unique connection to the artifacts. Their ship, Starseeker, dropped out of hyperspace to find something that shouldn't exist. The dead world below them was covered in massive structures that defied physics, cities that hung suspended in the air without visible support, now crystalline towers that stretched into the upper atmosphere like frozen lightning. By the ancestors. "Breathe, Captain Veltar, Xandria's military escort. How is this possible?" The survey data showed this world was lifeless. Marcus stood at the observation deck, his hands pressed against the transparent aluminum viewport. The structures below seemed to pulse gently, as if responding to his presence even from orbit. "They were waiting," he said quietly. Xandria moved. To stand beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her silver skin. Over the past weeks, as they'd prepared for this expedition, their relationship had deepened beyond professional collaboration. Stolen moments in the archives had become lingering touches. Shared meals had turned into intimate conversations that lasted until dawn. "Waiting for what?" she asked. "For someone who could wake them up." The landing party consisted of Marcus, Xandria, Captain Veltar, and a small team of specialists. As their shuttle descended through the planet's atmosphere, the floating cities began to glow more brightly. Welcoming beacons in the perpetual twilight, they landed on a crystalline platform that formed itself beneath their ship as they approached, the ancient technology flowing like liquid before solidifying into perfect structural support. Marcus stepped onto the surface first, and immediately the entire city began to sing with the same harmonic resonance they'd experienced in the archives. "The buildings are alive," whispered Dr. Kethalon, the expedition's xenobiologist, or at least they're responding to biological stimuli. As they moved deeper into the city, the structures around them shifted and changed, creating pathways and bridges that led them inexorably toward the central spire. Marcus found himself walking hand in hand with Xandria, neither of them commenting on the impropriety of their public display of affection. The central spire was a marvel of impossible architecture, its walls covered in flowing script that told the story of the Primarch civilization. As they read, the truth became clear and shocking. The Primarchs hadn't been aliens at all. They had been human, or rather humanity's ancestors, before they had spread across the galaxy, seeding worlds with their children and their knowledge. "This can't be right," muttered Captain Veltar, his Zelithian superiority clearly shaken. "Humans are a young species, barely evolved beyond their primitive origins." But the evidence was overwhelming. Genetic templates showed that modern humans carried dormant Primarch DNA, waiting for the right trigger to awaken their true potential. The Primarchs had deliberately scattered their bloodline across countless worlds. Knowing that one day their descendants would return to claim their heritage, Marcus felt something awakening within him as he read the ancient records. Memories that weren't his own began to surface, knowledge that had been locked away for millennia. He could see the great ships of his ancestors sailing between young stars, teaching primitive civilizations the secrets of fire and metal, language, and mathematics. The noble bloodlines, Andrea said suddenly, understanding flooding her features. We've been so wrong. Thought genetic purity meant superiority, but the Primarchs believed in genetic diversity. They spread themselves thin across the galaxy because they knew that mixing their blood with countless species would create something stronger. The central chamber of the spire held the greatest revelation of all, vast crystalline matrix that hummed with power, waiting for the touch of Primarch blood to reactivate. Marcus approached it slowly, Xandria at his side, both of them understanding that nothing would ever be the same after this moment. When Marcus placed his hands on the crystal matrix, the entire city exploded into brilliant life. Ancient defenses came online. Ships that had slumbered for eons began to stir in hidden hangars and across the galaxy. Other Primarch sites began to awaken in response. But more than that, Marcus felt his own DNA awakening, dormant genes expressing themselves for the first time in his lineage. His muscles strengthened, his senses sharpened, and his mind expanded to encompass knowledge that had been locked away since the dawn of civilization. Xandria watched in amazement as Marcus transformed before her eyes. He was still recognizably human, but enhanced, evolved, becoming something closer to the legendary Primarchs of old. When he turned to look at her, his eyes now held depths that spoke of ancient wisdom and infinite compassion. "I remember," he said softly, his voice carrying harmonics that made the crystal walls sing in response. "We didn't abandon the galaxy. We became it. Every species, every bloodline, carries part of us within them. The Zilithians, the Catharans, all of them are our children too." Tears ran down Xandria's silver cheeks as she understood. The rigid caste system of her people, the obsession with bloodline purity, all of it had been built on a fundamental misunderstanding of their own origins. They weren't separate species competing for dominance. They were all part of one vast family tree, scattered across the stars. Marcus reached for her hand, and when their fingers touched, she felt the awakening beginning within her own genetic code. The Primarchs hadn't just been human, she realized. They had been the potential that lived within all sentient life, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The galaxy was about to change, and their love had been the key that unlocked humanity's true legacy. News of the discovery spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and the reaction was swift and violent. Emperor Valtherin declared Marcus a dangerous heretic and issued orders for both him and Xandria to be captured and returned to Nexus Prime. For rehabilitation, the noble houses of a dozen species united in their condemnation of the Primarch revelation, seeing it as a threat to their carefully maintained power structures. Marcus and Xandria found themselves fugitives aboard the Starseeker, racing through hyperspace, with Imperial fleets closing in from all sides. Captain Veltar had made his choice, siding with his princess over his emperor. But his small crew was vastly outnumbered by the forces arrayed against them. "We can't keep running forever," Xandria said, as they studied the tactical display in the ship's command center. Red indicators showed hostile contacts in every direction, closing net that would soon trap them completely. Marcus stood behind her chair, his hands resting on her shoulders. The physical changes from his awakening had stabilized, leaving him stronger and more capable than before, but still recognizably the man she'd fallen in love with. "We don't need to run forever," he said quietly. "Just long enough." Long enough for what? He smiled, and she could see ancient knowledge gleaming in his eyes. For the others to wake up. Across the galaxy, other humans were beginning to experience their own awakenings. Engineers on distant space stations found themselves able to interface directly with alien technology. Soldiers discovered strength and reflexes that defied human norms. Scientists began making intuitive leaps that revolutionized entire fields of study. But the political situation was growing desperate. As they dropped out of hyperspace near a neutral trading station, hoping to resupply before the next jump, they found Imperial forces already waiting for them. "This is Admiral Kethfer of the Imperial Fleet," came the transmission. Surrender yourselves immediately, and I promise you'll be treated with dignity. Xandria activated the communications array. Uncle, she said, recognizing the Admiral's voice. You know I can't do that, Xandria. Child, you've been deceived by this human's lies. Return home, and we can put this madness behind us. She looked at Marcus, seeing not deception, but truth, in his transformed features. Over the past weeks, as they'd fled from system to system, their relationship had deepened beyond mere attraction. They had made love under alien stars, their bodies joining with a passion that transcended species barriers. She had felt his mind touching hers in moments of perfect intimacy, sharing memories and dreams that made them one being in two forms. The only madness is denying what we've discovered, she replied to her uncle. Humanity isn't humanity's enemy. We're all part of the same family. The Admiral's response was to open fire. The Starseeker shuddered under the impact of particle beams and missile strikes. Captain Veltar fought valiantly, but his single ship was no match for an entire battle fleet. Just as their shields began to fail, something extraordinary happened. Other ships began dropping out of hyperspace around them. Human vessels, yes, but also Zilithian rebels, Catharan dissidents, crystal minds who had chosen to question their programming. Fleet of the Awakened, drawn together by the spreading revelation of their shared heritage. The battle that followed lit up the space around the trading station like a new star. Marcus found himself at the tactical station, his enhanced abilities allowing him to coordinate the rebel fleet with impossible precision. He could feel the consciousness of every awakened being in the battle, their minds linked by the Primarch legacy flowing through their modified DNA. Incoming transmission from the Prime Minister of Earth, announced the communications officer. Marcus activated the link, and Prime Minister Washington's weathered face appeared on the main screen. Behind her, he could see the familiar skyline of New Geneva, but something was different. The human buildings were beginning to change, growing and flowing like living things as ancient architectural knowledge reasserted itself. Marcus, the Prime Minister said, we're receiving reports of awakenings all across human space. Our people are changing, becoming something more than we were. We need to know what's happening. We're becoming who we were always meant to be, Marcus replied. The Primarchs didn't die out. They became us, all of us, scattered across the galaxy to mature and grow. Now it's time to remember. As if summoned by his words, the ancient city ship from the dead world materialized in space around them, its crystalline bulk dwarfing even the largest Imperial dreadnought. The awakened technology had followed them across the galaxy, ready to defend its inheritors. Admiral Kethver's fleet found themselves facing not just a ragtag group of rebels, but the living embodiment of their species' deepest myths. The Primarch city ship's defenses were beyond anything in the current galaxy's arsenal. Weapons that reshaped matter at the quantum level, and shields that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Imperial fleet's retreat was swift and unconditional in the aftermath of victory. Marcus and Xandria stood together on the observation deck of the city ship, watching the stars wheel past as they began the journey to Earth. Their love had become something more than personal passion. It was the symbol of a new age, proof that the artificial barriers between species could be overcome. What happens now? Xandria asked, leaning into his embrace. Marcus smiled, feeling the vast network of awakened minds growing stronger across the galaxy. Now we heal the wounds our ancestors left behind. We remember that we're one people, separated only by distance and time. She turned in his arms, her violet eyes reflecting the light of distant stars. And us. What happens to us? His answer was a kiss that tasted of eternity and promise, a joining of hearts that transcended the boundaries of flesh and species. They had become living bridges between worlds, their love the proof that humanity's true legacy wasn't conquest or dominance, but unity. The galaxy would never be the same. Legacy Awakened's transformation wasn't without its growing pains. Across human space, cities reshaped themselves according to Primarch architectural principles, growing upward and outward in organic spirals that confused traditional urban planners. Humans found themselves able to communicate telepathically with awakened members of other species, creating a network of consciousness that spanned solar systems. Emperor Valtheron, the Zilithian Empire, wasn't prepared to accept the new reality. Quietly, 6 months after the battle at the trading station, he assembled the greatest armada in galactic history, calling upon ancient treaties and racial prejudices to unite the noble houses against what he termed the human contamination they seek. To destroy the natural order, he declared before the assembled fleet commanders. To reduce all our proud bloodlines to their mongrel equality, this cannot be permitted. But even as he spoke, members of his own court were experiencing their own awakenings. The Primarch legacy wasn't limited to humans. It existed in dormant form within every spacefaring species. Waiting for the right catalyst to express itself, Princess Xandria stood beside Marcus on the bridge of the city ship as the Imperial Armada dropped out of hyperspace near Earth. The blue-green world below them showed signs of incredible change, with floating cities beginning to appear above the ancient continents and vast garden ships growing in the orbital shipyards. 10,000 ships, reported Captain Veltar, his own features showing the subtle changes of partial awakening. The Emperor has brought everything he has. Marcus felt calm despite the overwhelming odds. Through the awakened network, he could sense millions of transformed minds preparing for what might be the final battle. But he also sensed something else. Doubt within the Imperial fleet itself, as more and more crew members began to question everything they'd been taught about genetic superiority. "Open a channel to all ships," Marcus ordered. His image appeared on screens throughout both fleets. It's no longer the simple engineer who had once been dismissed as inferior. The awakening had revealed his true nature, a descendant of the Primarchs, carrying within his genes the accumulated wisdom of the galaxy's first teachers. "People of the galaxy," he began, his voice carrying across the void to touch the minds of awakened beings everywhere. "We stand at a crossroads. We can continue the cycle of division and conflict that has defined our history, or we can choose to remember our shared heritage." Emperor Veltheron's response was predictable. "Destroy them all," he commanded. The battle began with a fury that lit up the space around Earth like a miniature star. The Imperial fleet's weapons were devastating, but they were facing more than ships and shields. They were fighting the accumulated knowledge of the Primarchs themselves. It's technology that operated on principles beyond current understanding. The city ship's defenses created pockets of twisted space-time that deflected incoming fire, while its weapons reached across vast distances to disable rather than destroy enemy vessels. Marcus had made it clear that this wasn't about conquest, but about awakening, about helping their attackers remember who they truly were as the battle raged. Something extraordinary began happening within the Imperial fleet. Crews who had spent their lives believing in the superiority of pure bloodlines suddenly found themselves experiencing memories that weren't their own. Ancient knowledge flooding their consciousness as their Primarch heritage activated as Zilithian. Commander on one of the Imperial dreadnoughts suddenly understood the true purpose of the genetic modifications his ancestors had made to their species. They hadn't been creating superior beings. They had been preparing their people to eventually rejoin the Primarch. Legacy Data Catherian weapons officer discovered that her species' crystalline neural implants weren't just computational devices, but receivers designed to connect with the galactic consciousness network that the Primarchs had always intended to create. Across the Imperial fleet, the awakening spread like wildfire. Ships began breaking formation, their crews overwhelmed by the revelation of their true origins. Some continued to fight, their commanders too deeply indoctrinated to accept change, but others began to defect, their awakened crews unable to continue. Attacking their own extended family, Emperor Valtheron watched his carefully assembled armada dissolve into chaos, and something inside him finally snapped. If he couldn't maintain the old order through conventional warfare, then he would ensure that no one survived to see the new one. His flagship began charging its planet-killer weapon, device capable of cracking worlds in half. "If we cannot rule," he announced to his remaining loyal ships, "then let the galaxy burn." But Marcus had anticipated this desperation. The city ship moved with impossible grace, placing itself between the Imperial flagship and Earth. As Valtheron's weapon fired, the ancient vessel's shields absorbed the devastating energy and redirected it harmlessly into space. "Enough, Marcus," said, his voice carried by the awakened network to every mind in both fleets. "This ends now." The city ship's response was not violence, but revelation. It broadcast the complete Primarch historical records to every ship in the Imperial fleet, showing them the truth of their origins. The noble bloodlines they prized so highly were revealed to be carefully guided evolutionary paths, designed by the Primarchs to help each species develop its unique strengths while remaining part of the greater whole. Emperor Valtheron himself was forced to confront the truth as ancient memories flooded his consciousness. His own bloodline carried Primarch heritage, the result of careful genetic planning that stretched back to the dawn of his civilization. Everything he had built his identity upon was revealed to be a misunderstanding of his ancestors' true intentions. The Emperor's final transmission was barely a whisper. "What have we done?" The battle ended not with victory and defeat, but with understanding. As the Imperial fleet stood down, Marcus felt the awakened network expand to encompass millions of new minds. The galaxy's artificial divisions were finally beginning to heal. Xandria found Marcus standing in the city's ship's observation lounge, watching as Earth's new floating cities rose majestically into the sky. She slipped her arms around him from behind, resting her head against his shoulder. "It's really over, isn't it?" she said softly. "The war is over," Marcus replied, leaning back into her embrace. "But the real work is just beginning. We have an entire galaxy to help remember itself." Below them, representatives from hundreds of species were already beginning to arrive on Earth, drawn by the revelation of their shared heritage. The rigid hierarchies that had defined galactic civilization for millennia were giving way to something new, a true community of awakened beings working together to fulfill the Primarch's ancient dream. Marcus turned in Xandria's arms, seeing his own joy reflected in her violet eyes. Their love had been the catalyst that changed everything. Proof that the bonds between awakened beings transcended the artificial barriers of species and bloodline. "So what do we do now?" she asked, echoing her question from months before. Marcus smiled, feeling the vast network of consciousness stretching across the galaxy, millions of awakened minds ready to build a better future together. "Now we go home," he said. "All of us." Together, their kiss was witnessed by the stars themselves, a promise of the golden age that was finally beginning to dawn.